5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. I'm Dear Myrtle, your friend in genealogy, and welcome to the first session of British and Irish military records. This is another Dear Myrtle genealogy study group, and we've had some little things happen, and I'm going to be explaining them to you this morning. First of all, I'd like to welcome Hilary Argyll in Wales, who has British research, and John Laws, who is in Scotland, also has British research, one named Study Work, and of course Cousin Russ here to bring your comments in. Let me pull up and tell you a little bit about our coordinator. Claire Brisson-Banks, who is not with us this morning because the storms in the greater Kansas City area have knocked out internet, and we've been working on trying to get her connected without success. She is the one that's coordinating this study group, and she has given us 3 things that I'm going to be sharing with you this morning to get you started, and we'll look forward to having her expertise with us starting again next week. One of the reasons why I wanted Claire to chair this study group, you know, what do I know about British research? I look to people like Claire, former British research consultant and technology specialist at the Family History Library. She should still be there, actually, if you ask me, because we have internet. Of course, there's days I don't as well. She's also an online family history instructor at BYU, Idaho, and that's pretty exciting because she's got, I think, about 120 students that she's working with on a routine basis. So we look forward to having her join us again. One of the FamilySearch wiki pages is titled British Military Records. This is going to be our partial outline. We also know that we're going to be dealing with Ireland records. And one of the reasons we liked this research outline, first of all, we look for syllabus material without having to reinvent. But if I zoom in, there is a very specific timeline in the category of history and background provided by the folks who created this wiki page. We're really thankful for that. Now, Claire realizes that we're all online researchers, and she told me yesterday, we had a final conference of about an hour in length. She said, yes, there is this other wiki page, Cousin Russ has shared it with you, called British Military Records Online. It covers date range, various websites, and if there's a cost involved, etc. And she was pretty excited about that. I only gave a cursory glance at it, but I don't have her discerning eye. But I am always excited. And I asked her, what percentage of the records are online? Excuse me. I can't find my mute button. I'm sorry, guys. That was a stifled sneeze, the best I could do. Anyway, she tells me that an estimated 94% of British military records still are in textual format, meaning they are not scanned and they are not online. There are also some records that are available in microfilm that are not online, and she's going to direct our attention to that. So that's the second wiki. And then Cousin Russ, where is that Google Sheet? I'm finding the link to it, and we want to share this link, with all of you. As we have done in our Scottish records research, as well as our beginning genealogy study group, we are compiling our own list of links, and these are from what we study in our sessions. And here again, right here on that overview page with that graphic that you'll become quite familiar with over the next 6 weeks, are the links to British Military Records Online, the one that Claire particularly likes, and the British Military Records that helped old Mert get up to speed quickly with at least the history and timeline. Now, as things go on, and we discuss them. She will add the links to these various lists. Here's the one for TNA, the National Archives, Ancestry.com, FamilySearch. And if you make a copy of this for your own use, you'll need to update it every week. You cannot use hers, you can only view it. And I see right now that there are 3 of us viewing this. Let me show you how to view it, and then we will go from there. Okay. If you can view it, but you want to download it as your own file. So Cousin Russ, well, let's see, I just went to the wrong place, didn't I? There it is on my list. I can't actually type in this form, and I may want to add my own columns or rows of information, what I was looking for, etc. So if we want to download it, we click File, and then we can download it as a Microsoft Excel, an open document format, etc. Or we can just add a copy of it. See, that's a little plus with the Google Drive. Add it to my drive, and let's go look at it. Okay, come up. Tell me my internet's going to be weird. Anyway, that's how you're going to keep a copy of it on your own computer or on your own Google Drive. Cousin Russ, I can remember years ago when they first came out with the term Google Drive, and I didn't get it. It's like another hard drive.
It is, absolutely. I love it. I love it.
Okay. So there's one other thing that I'd like to tell you. And that is that our good friend Audrey Collins from the National Archives will be joining us during the last 15 to 20 minutes of a session. And Claire and I have decided we're going to ask her, we're going to put things on a wish list so that if we come across in our studies a particular record group that looks intriguing, where the records are not yet online, but they seem to be pretty valuable, we're going to make a wish list and ask Audrey to get us a copy of a document from that record group. The other thing that I'm interested in hearing about from you all who are attending, and there are a lot of you who are here, is where you have already obtained a military record on one of your British or Irish ancestors, because we learn by sharing documents more than just talking about things.
And where we find those documents.
Yeah, that's a kicker. Okay, so Hillary, have you run across any British records of military focus on your ancestors yet?
I've used military records, a few different ones from different time periods, so
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Have you had census records where it indicated that they were a pensioner, or that they were, did they mention the unit in that census record?
I can't remember whether they did or not. I certainly had ones that said that they were army pensioners and things like that, but I can't remember whether they actually said the specific unit.
Well, I've been studying this book, Ancestral Trails. Would somebody look that up on Amazon.com so we can give the link to everybody? I didn't know anything about this when it came out with its first edition. This is the second edition, and not being able to judge it, I was a little bit flummoxed because the Genealogical Publishing Company sent it to me to review. How could I review something if I can't compare what I know about research with what's in the book? Well, I have had a colleague in Bradenton, Florida, who said just based on the military chapter 20, records of the Army, Royal Marines, and Royal Air Force, and the subsequent chapter, which has to do with shipping records and seamen, that just based on that, thank you, Hillary, he would rate this book highly. And since then, this book by Mark Herber has been well regarded. And he mentioned that in census records you may get no mention of military service. This is a little bit different from the types of records we're seeing. Kathleen, do you have a copy of your marriage certificate? Let's see what you've got there. Do you have a scanned image of it that you could send to us for next week?
Kathleen says, I ordered a marriage certificate from England and the groom's occupation was listed as private in the 12th Lancers Hampton Court. FindMyPast might have the Chelsea pensioner record, but I can't be sure yet.
Okay, so
and she does say yes.
All right, so I'm going to send you my email address. You can do this real quickly, and we'll look at one document before we're going to be concluding early without Claire this week. I'll open up my email. If you can send me a copy of that right away, we'll take a look at it. And that's always a good thing when we learn from our friends this way. Okay. And then, John, let me ask you, in your research, you do slightly different research. You look at laws, the surname laws, as it might occur anywhere in the world. And certainly, as we think of the British Empire, we're thinking of service in India, many other places. And so have you used military records to help you in your pursuit?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the major ones I've used is Commonwealth War Graves.
Okay.
CWG.org, I think it is. Commonwealth War Graves.
Okay.
It's initials.org.
I'm pulling it up. No, that's Chemical Weapons Working Group. It's not the Commonwealth War Graves. All right, we'll pull up that link, and we'll just take a few more minutes before we conclude.
Can you? I cannot elevate Audrey.
Okay, Audrey is here.
Yes.
Okay, I will elevate her. I can't either.
No, I can't either.
This
can't be reached.
Audrey, there's no button for me to bring her in, and she is on Google. Darn. Audrey is here, darn. I can't get her up on the panel. How frustrating. Okay, you're going to pull up that link for me, and let's catch Audrey up to speed. Let me pull up the document that has just been shared with us, open with, and we'll pull it up in Snagit Editor so I can look at it. All right, beautiful document here.
Audrey, if you're listening, I just sent you a Facebook link. If you find that, click on the link in Facebook. Thank you.
Yeah, private Facebook message. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Wow, this is incredible. Kathleen got this over to us so readily. All right, what we're looking at is a document of marriage, certified copy of marriage entry, where we see on the 24th of April, 1864. I should get out of erasing. Let's see. William Richard Parkins and Anne Malton. Oh, good.
24th of April, 1864.
Okay, so Audrey, you're going to want to change your settings at the top.
I think she's got an extra tab open.
Oh yeah, close the other tab as you're in now.
64. Okay, so Audrey, you're going to want to settings at the top.
I think she's got an extra tab open.
Oh yeah, close the other tab as you're in now.
64.
See, she's watching and she's participating. There you are.
Good.
Audrey, we have an interesting challenge. Now I can't even put the camera on her. Can you speak?
That the American Southern accent is not a sign of ignorance, but actually the fact that, according to linguists, we're the only people in the United States who generally still sound.
All right, we have another. We'll need to mute you for a minute, Audrey, because something else is playing in the background.
This Moonlight Magnet.
Thank you. So close the other item. You had not only this hangout in the background playing, but then a lady giving a lecture. Okay, so here we are looking at this, Kathleen. I thank you so much for helping me. Here it says rank or profession, private in the 12th Lancers at Hampton Court. Okay, and in the book, Ancestral Trails, it is considered by this author unusual that it will mention the rank and profession. Maybe it's because he was active duty. Dear Audrey, are you here? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you. Here's our challenge. There was a terrible storm in the greater Kansas City area, and though we've tried everything, we cannot get our Claire Brisson-Banks online.
Well, I hope this is okay.
Okay, so what we've done is we've shared two different research outlines, and we didn't know if we would see you here today or not.
Yeah, I made it, just got in from work, so.
We appreciate it. I don't know why she isn't show. Oh, you have to hit the
Business Hangout icon on the left.
It's a green Business Hangouts. While she's doing that, I will bring up the National Archives. That's where she works. They also have a series of what they call research guides for military records. Cousin Russ will share that link with you. That'll give Audrey a chance to get her settings. If you click on Business Hangouts and allow it to
it's a green circle with 3 heads in it.
Yeah, I did that. It's thinking about loading.
Okay, good.
Good, thank you.
All right, so I do want to, 62 guides. We could spend all our time here. So those are our basic resources. The British and Irish Google Sheet that Claire is creating and will continue to add to. The British military records from FamilySearch Wiki, and also the outline that from FamilySearch Wiki called British. Here it comes. British Military Records Online. Claire, since Claire isn't here and I can't focus on you specifically, Audrey, Claire had given me an estimate that it's considered that perhaps only 6% of the military records that are available for British and Irish service persons are available online. A very tiny percentage. Do you think that's a fair estimate?
Where there is a full service record, those pretty much all of the surviving records are online somewhere or other. It's a very high percentage. The problem is that for an awful lot of people, you won't have a full service record. If somebody died in service, why keep a record? So you'll find information about them, but you won't find a nice one-stop shop. You can trace them through things like musters and pay lists, description books, and all sorts of other things, but you won't find a nice sort of several-page document that gives you all the information about that man. But for somebody who got out of the army alive and served a reasonable length of time, reasonable chance of finding it, but an awful lot of people just weren't in long enough, or they were in for a long time and they came out dead.
All right, so I'm going to try to compare and contrast this with what I know about U.S. military records. So compare and contrast with what you're saying. So a full service record would be useful to, if they were going to pay a pension to somebody, they'd have to know when he mustered in, when he mustered out, where he served, etc., to see if he's even eligible for a pension or eligible for service medals, etc. Is that commensurate with what you'd say for your full service?
If somebody got a pension, then you've got a pretty good chance of finding a record. If it's a long time ago, if it's early 19th century, it might not have an awful lot of detail in it. Really good ones are the late 19th century, very early 20th century ones, and for the people who served in the First World War, where the records survived, they can be incredibly detailed, but unfortunately, about 2/3 of them were destroyed. But pre-1914, the closer you get to that date, the more records survive and the more details in them. Why did the army keep the records? There's money at the bottom of it. Otherwise, they don't just do it for fun.
Yeah, there wouldn't be any reason to pay somebody to keep that record or to take care of that paperwork.
Why space with it? So yeah, let's buy with it. So.
I totally get that.
I have a question for Audrey.
Yes. Yes,
Audrey, like our U.S. military records, there's a number, a serial number that usually will appear on each document. Does the same thing happen on your side of the pond? In other words, some identifier that says, yes, this is the same person as this record.
Yeah, sort of. Unfortunately, the idea of the unique personal service number, that doesn't come in until after the First World War. So before that, you will often find a number, but it's not necessarily going to be unique. And it's not unusual for somebody to have 2 or 3 different numbers in the course of their career. So
people mustered from one outfit to another, they sometimes change their numbers, didn't they?
Even sometimes the regiment will just do some renumbering. So you get the First World War record, sometimes you'll get somebody who's been in the same unit and they've got a couple of different numbers, and they move to another one, they get a different number again. And people get confused because they know their ancestors got this particular number, and they search by the number and they get somebody completely different and say, yeah, loads of people have the same number. It helps you. After the First World War, and I'm not sure at what date, then the British Army had yet another one of its, let's reorganise the way we keep the records. And then they introduced the unique number. So people have been in the military themselves say, but I know my number was unique. Yeah, yours was, but your grandfather's might not have been.
So we've got to figure out and adapt to the fact that historically speaking, it's different than what the rules are now. We have muster rolls that we look at here for U.S. military. We're thinking U.S. Civil War, things like that. And the pay lists are in the Treasury Department, an entirely different record group. Are your pay lists part of the War Department records, or are they separate?
Yeah, the great majority are going to be in a War Office series. There's a few odds and ends you'll find somewhere else. There are some sort of samples of records relating to pensions in series PIN. I can't quite remember what that stands for. And I think the stuff in PMG, which is Paymaster General. But the vast majority, if it's Army, you're going to find it in a WO series.
Let me ask you, in looking at this certified copy of a marriage entry, where it lists the gentleman as being a private in the 12th Lancers, does that mean he's still active duty, do you think?
Yes, that's how I would read it, because it's not that rare to get the rank. It's nice if you do, but I never expect it. It's just going to be soldier. Oh, thanks, that's helpful.
Yeah, right.
So it's nice if you get it, and I would, unless it says formally, then you'd assume that he was still in service, because what they're asking for is somebody's occupation at that time. They don't know they don't ask what he was doing last year. 40 years now. So unless you've got some massive evidence to the contrary, I would say that means he is in service at the date of that wedding.
Okay.
Cavalry regiment.
Yes. That's a hard thing for us to understand, that why it doesn't just say cavalry, but it is mounted horse with the lance, isn't it?
We have heavy cavalry and light cavalry.
What's the difference between heavy and light?
And there's dragoons and
dragoons.
Dragoons are also a type of cavalry, and so the foot would be the infantry, correct?
Yeah. The precedence the cavalry come first, and then the various foot regiments.
Okay.
And the guards regiments are, they're deemed to be the elite of the foot regiments.
Okay, I want to talk about an understanding, and I think that you've got a military record to share with us in a minute, Hillary. I want to talk about before 1707. To me, that was a year that was etched in my mind, as before that there was no national regular army. And my understanding, and tell me if this is just an old wives' tale or something I've heard about merry old England, that during the earlier time periods, the landowner, the owner of the land, I might be using the wrong term, would have his various tenant farmers or whatever you call them, and each one would have to take a turn at being in the defense of that land, that landed property. Tell me about that, Hillary.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Hillary. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean. I looked at you, Audrey, but I couldn't click on you. So go ahead.
Yeah, what you're really talking about is the feudal system, and that goes right back to Anglo-Saxon times and Norman times.
Yes.
And everybody, the king was at the top of the pyramid, and everybody held land ultimately from the king, and the barons and people lower down held land of him, and in return for your land, which when you got right the way down the scale, it was you're talking about subsistence farming. You might pay a money rent, but on the whole you owed service, and that might be service on the lord's land, but it could equally be military service. But we started having an army, a regular army, after our Civil War. Not the English Civil War, but actually it was fought all over what's now the UK, so Civil War. And prior to that, it was just people who were big and bad and mean and rich enough would raise their own regiments, and the Civil War was really a whole bunch of private armies. After the restoration of the monarchy, you did get the beginnings of a regular army. 1707, though, the significance of that is that's the Act of Union with Scotland. Before 1707, you had England and you had Scotland, and you also had Ireland, and poor old Wales had been just swallowed up. And although they were all had the same monarch, but they were separate kingdoms, whereas after 1707, that was the Act of Union of England and Scotland. So that's when you get the beginnings of something that you can call Britain as a...
Okay, so any type of family tradition or some write-up in some old book about so-and-so serving prior to that time period, those are not national records we're going to find at the National Archives.
Oh, you can, yeah, there's not really very much. I mean, most of our records start later in the 18th century. We do have some records, and I think one of the guides we certainly used to have one, which was about earlier military records, but they're very bitty. So when you're talking about records of the British Army, you're really talking about mid-18th century.
Okay.
Early that there are records, but they're much harder to track down, and I'm a bit out of my comfort zone when we get there.
Okay, I got it. All right, so Hillary, tell us about the document you're going to share with us, and when you bring it up on the screen, we will dive into that one. Okay, I'll move the camera. Okay, so this is a different marriage record. Okay. And tell us about it. We can't hear you. It might be your inline mic.
Inline, yeah, inline mic. This is actually scanned registers and that are actually online at Ancestry.
Okay.
Now, the bottom one here is somebody that I was interested in, and his father is shown as a pensioner here. and this person, George Clark, was actually in the later census, he's actually shown as an army pensioner himself.
Okay.
So I suspect both of them were in the army, and he was actually born in Ireland, so I suspect I wouldn't be surprised if his father was born in Ireland as well, although I haven't managed to get very far with tracing his father, and that, unfortunately, Clark's a bit of a common name, including in Ireland. But I also noticed that when I was looking around, that in this one here, there's another person is a private in the 14th foot there, so they obviously did. But this is a particular place where you might expect to find a lot of military, because it was in parish of Farnborough, and there's a military barracks and that round there. So that doesn't you will find at certain places that you will probably find people that are serving in the army, because that's where all the barracks and everything were. So
cool. I have a question about the term pensioner. Does that mean exclusively military?
I think probably at that time you didn't have the old age pensions and things like we do now, so it probably I don't know if anybody knows anything to the contrary, but most of
I think that our gal from TNA might know.
If it just says pensioner, that you can usually take that to mean an army pensioner, because it wasn't. I mean, Hillary's quite right. We didn't have state pensions until just over 100 years ago. It was really the Army and the Navy, the armed services, they were the only people who were giving out pensions. So if you just see the word pensioner without qualification, that's almost certainly going to mean an Army pensioner. If sometimes it's qualified by saying Chelsea pensioner, which is just another way of saying Army pensioner, because the pensions were administered from Chelsea Hospital. If it says a Greenwich pensioner, then that means it's a sailor, because the Admiralty administered those.
So Greenwich is for sailors pensioner. That's where they were.
Royal Navy and Royal Marines, and Chelsea, or just pension on its own, is going to be Army. And the first civilians in any numbers who got pensions were people who worked in naval dockyards. But if you saw one of those, it would normally say dockyard pensioner. And if you scratch the surface, the people who worked in the dockyards had often served in the Army or the Navy before as well. Interesting.
All right, now I'm wondering about a distinction between seamen, and I think that would be like our merchant marines, who were not a military unit per se, although some of them became regular Navy during World War II. You mentioned the Royal Marines, and you mentioned the Navy, and then are these seamen, S-E-A-M-E-N, are they not military? They just went to sea?
Yeah, you have to be very careful, because it depends who's writing it down, so it's not an exact science. Generally speaking, a seaman could be Royal Navy or could be Merchant Navy. If it says mariner, then that's almost always going to be Merchant Navy.
Okay, so they would be like maybe somebody with the East India Company, where it was business related, not military.
Well, so there was a TV drama on years and years ago, and there was an elderly Irish lady in it, and she was talking about her son who was going to join the Navy. He said, not the Navy that fights, the Navy that delivers things.
Okay, I get it. All right.
Be careful, because people don't always use the right description. So, as a rule, it's mariner for Merchant Navy, and seaman could be either. Quite often it will say something like RN, in which case you mean, oh, that's Royal Navy. And although people did move between the services, merchant seamen might join the Royal Navy. People tend to be on one or the other, except in times of war, when the merchant people in the merchant fleets were. They were generally in the reserves. There was the volunteer, there was the reserve and the volunteer reserve, and the reserve was just you're in the Merchant Navy, therefore you're in the reserve. Putting it, that's a gross oversimplification. The volunteers are the people who volunteered.
I'll show you on this screen why I asked that question. I have been studying chapter 20 and 21, I think, from Mark D. Herber's Ancestral Trails, where he has the first of those two chapters is Army, Royal Marines, and Royal Air Force. Then the second chapter is of those two is shipping and seamen. And right here under military, they put maritime as part of it. And then I saw these merchant seaman records, and I wondered how, I'm relating it to what I know of my Uncle Jack, who was a merchant marine, which meant he served as an electrician for commercial shipping, but they were pressed into service. I don't know if he was pressed or volunteered, but they were put on Navy ships and received regular Navy pay through the Navy during World War II, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, when the U.S. became quite active, and he was in the Pacific. So there is some blurring of the term just by popular usage, but also by that volunteer or reserve option of your merchant seaman. Okay.
You get complications as well. An ancestor of mine, my great-great-grandfather, was in the First World War. He was a merchant seaman. He'd been at sea pretty much all his life. And although he was never part of the Royal Navy, the ship that he was serving on had been commandeered by the Royal Navy to act as a messenger. So he was never, he never took the King's shilling or the Queen's shilling. He was always, just a merchant seaman. He worked on the engines. But he's a naval casualty because his ship was torpedoed. But it was under Royal Navy command, but it was still a merchant ship. So he's got, poor man, he's got at least 3 death certificates.
Oh my!
Royal Navy casualties. He comes under just maritime deaths. He's on the Commonwealth War Graves as a war death, and because he was normally resident in Scotland, he's in the Scottish, deaths at sea as well. So no birth certificate, but loads of death certificates. But he's a good example of that blurring between the Royal Navy and the Merchant Navy.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Audrey. In naval ships in earlier times, 1700s and early 1800s, the master of a ship was of a frigate or some such, was a civilian, wasn't he?
Not as far as I know, but I'm a bit shaky on that. I know some about. I know more about the Army than I do about the Navy, and the earlier it gets, the shakier I get. But as far as I know, the Army and the Navy, and I'm guessing this may be the same in America. On the whole, there's officers and there's other ranks.
Yeah.
Very little overlap.
And the officers, as I understand it, you had first class volunteers and then midshipmen, whether you purchased in, whether they all purchased in.
Well, the Royal Navy has always been more of a meritocracy than the Army. Until well into the 19th century, you could buy your way into a.
Oh, that's what you mean, like buying your commission.
Yeah. And you sold it on as you moved up through the ranks. There was an element of merit in it, but you could, you sold on your commission. So in the early Army lists, you see it's not just that somebody's been appointed to this or that rank, but he's always in place of so and so who's either been promoted further up or died or left or whatever. So there was a post that had a monetary value, and it's a bit like the housing ladder. You buy your way in at the bottom and you work your way up. And that is the Army. The Navy didn't do that. The Navy was more of a meritocracy.
All right, I'd want to bring in this comment from Molly, if you would, please, Russ, to liken what we're seeing in the U.S. Armed Forces and compare and contrast, because most of our people here attending are U.S. researchers who are bridging now over into learning about British and Irish military.
Molly says Daddy was in the U.S. Armed Guard. He was on steamships and other non-military ships during World War II. They were the only military present aboard ships.
Okay, I want to ask you about, is there a difference, Hillary, in the records of officers or over the enlisted men, the lower ranks? Would there be more available on officers? By the way, folks, here is, in fact, thank you, everyone, for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, where you can search by name. That's been mentioned a couple of times so far. So back to my question. Is there a difference in the record-keeping practices for officers over enlisted men?
Considerably.
Yes.
Okay.
I think the only time when you see them together in the same list is something like Commonwealth War Graves and medal rolls, but the personal records are often very different, and there is a reason for that. You had different reasons for keeping records on the other ranks. For example, whether it's Army, Navy, or Marines, for other ranks, you will usually get some kind of physical description, right down to tattoos, scars, missing fingers, all sorts of things, which is fantastic for the genealogist. But one of the reasons that they kept that information was because if the man deserted, you had a good description. And incidentally, it might help identifying the body as well. Whereas officers, you didn't need that because the officers didn't have to be there. And the concept of officers deserting, that just didn't happen. So you had different reasons for wanting to keep records. The other thing was that until comparatively late on, they would take anybody for the ranks, provided they were willing to sign up, because you always need cannon fodder. But for officers who are leaders of men, you had to be a member of the Church of England.
Oh, okay. And fairly educated?
Not so much, because some of them, infantry regiments said rude things about cavalry, that shoot the horse that's got more brains than the man sitting on its back. It was that they were good, loyal communicants of the Church of England. So you might not get a detailed service record for an officer in the way that you might for one of the enlisted men, but you might well find a record or a copy of a baptism certificate, because he would be required to produce that. There were all sorts of things that you couldn't do unless you were a member of the established church.
When there's Army and Navy lists, you can follow a man's career, which you certainly can't in any other ranks. People like me, other ranks.
I have another question, and you brought up church records. What if there was here we call them a garrison, where it's not actually a fort, but it's an established place where people are billeted and their families may be there. Is it possible that you would think, you may not know you have an ancestor who served in the military, but you may notice from the births of his children that they're in these odd places, not just in the home state or home, I don't know. What do you think?
If you see that you've got children born in certain places, particularly if you've got children in different places, and one of the places is Chatham, and one of the places is Aldershot, you think, oh, army bases. Now we know that because that's just our kind of British general knowledge. And we
wouldn't know that. We would have to. You learned that in school, in elementary school. Probably.
I learned that from being at school in Chatham. Chatham is a big military and a naval base. Portsmouth, the big naval dockyards are Portsmouth, Plymouth, and Chatham, and there are ones as well.
Yes.
But those are the really huge ones. And there are lots of smaller ones. And then for the army, so Chatham is also a major base for the Marines and for the army. But there are other places, if you know that there are major, there are lots of barracks, and some of them, there are places like Lancaster and Preston. So it's not.
So,
And
London, of course, although the Tower of London.
do we have
And of
another
course-
document, Hillary? Is that what you're showing us? Or is this the same one? Oh, no, it's quite different. What is this?
This is a Royal Navy Register of Seamen Service, and this is actually during First World War. So this person signed up to serve during World War One, and served on a ship called the Amphitrite.
Okay.
And that for a very short period of time, but it gives quite a lot of information because it gives a sort of description of height and things and any distinguishing marks. If I scroll over, it says he's got a birthmark on his back. So, and this is one of my ancestors. So it's interesting that you get a description of what they look like, even if you've never met them.
Now, I can relate to this on the muster roll of one of my Union Civil War ancestors. It says his height, that he has brown hair, ruddy complexion, and blue eyes. And he signed it. But this is an official, like, this isn't your ancestor's signature. All of this is the writing by the clerk in that unit.
Yeah.
That makes me wonder, one of the record groups that we use here in the U.S. infrequently, because beginning genealogists don't know about this military record, are the daily reports and the monthly reports, where every morning who stands up at when they raise the flag, and who's been sent to sick bay and things like that. And then there's a monthly summary, particularly noting who's come in and who's left because they were AWOL or they were given on leave or they were killed in battle. But if you look at the dailies, you can see what specific day somebody passed away. Do you have those kind of reports of for any time period? Is that an unknown or sound familiar to you?
That's the sort of thing that we have in the army muster rolls, and you get them from late 18th century up to about 1890. They're fizzling out a bit by then, but essentially it's a list of everybody of every rank, just everybody who was there, and the format varies a bit, but usually somewhere in the book for that period you will have a list of all the men who joined the battalion or who joined the regiment during the period, and the men who left. So they're fantastic if you haven't got a service record for a man, because you can trace him through the musters so long as you can pin him down to a place and a time. For example, you've got the baptism of a child at a church near a naval base or near an army base. So you think, oh right, that means he was stationed at that place, and you get the right muster roll out, and you just trace back and back and back and forwards and forwards and forwards, and you get the line of his career there. So they're very useful.
And those type of records, those daily or monthly reports, are they digitized, or would you be looking at them in textual format or microfilm?
Originals, but a few have been digitized, and this is where Ancestry, they've kind of missed a trick. They've digitized some of the musters for regiments that were in over on your side of the water around about 1912, give or take, for some reason. And I think they've got them filed under Canada. So you're not going to go looking for them there, really, but what they are, this is bits of the British Army over there during that little local difficulty we had.
You mean the War of 1812, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, that little difficulty.
There are some, but they're not. They could have made much more of a feature of that, because you don't go there looking for Canadians, but you will find lots of your English, Irish, even Germans. There were lots of Germans in the British Army.
Interesting.
I have a question.
Yes, Russ.
Audrey, I know that on our side of the pond, if you know the military unit, you can find some history and maybe what battles they were in if it was during wartime. Do you have the same kind of records on your side of the pond? If Hillary found the unit on the two records that she shared with us, can you look up the history of that unit?
Yeah, sort of. Again, the really, really detailed records are the 20th century ones, for the two world wars, we've got war diaries, which are very, very detailed. There isn't an exact equivalent of that for the earlier period, but you can find out a fair amount through the musters, and of course the regiments themselves. There's lots of regimental histories in print, and also online. You get a lot of the regimental museums have got a lot of information online, so you can find out a lot about the regiment from a variety of different sources. And I think they've got a lot of the original information from records that we have, but we don't have a nice bundle like the war diaries that we have for the First and Second World Wars. But you can certainly find it.
What have you got there, Russ?
Shared on my screen an emblem that was in the family. We knew about it, or we didn't know about it till I stopped by Historical Society, and I wondered what that meant. And I, in fact, found that it is the Black Watch.
That's right. My Uncle Tommy was in that.
And so I found this on Wikipedia, but it talked about the 42nd. And that was a buckle, from what I'm told, that is a buckle that he wore. So I was able to track from that emblem, and there was a card on the back. It's at a historical society in Charlestown, West Virginia, and it said it was the Black Watch. So I was able to go to Wikipedia to find that, and there are books on the Black Watch.
Oh yeah, my Uncle Tommy was in the Black Watch. He served in Korea in the 42nd. And, it's one of the few regiments where I know the official name and the number.
Yep.
All right, we got a question from the community from Linda Jordan, and then I have a question for you about service time periods.
Linda says, do you know if it was required in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that if someone in the military had to get okay by superior to marry? I have grandparents that were married in twice close time frame. One document said she was a sergeant, Queen's own cam at the parish church in Lancaster.
So I needed my commanding officer's permission when I got married.
So is a sergeant a non-commissioned officer?
He is indeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get quite a lot of this of people. They didn't need permission to marry necessarily, but each regiment, they didn't really approve of private soldiers being married.
Okay, private meaning those lower ranks, the privates and non-commissioned officers. Okay.
But the army realised that it was quite useful having a few women about the place. So you would have a lot of men who, as far as the army was concerned, were single men, although they might be actually married. But there would be a certain number where the wives were what was called on the strength, and they would be officially, they could live in the barracks, they were provided for, they had rations provided for them, and they could travel with the
army. They do things like laundry and things like that. Yeah.
So there would also be lots and lots of men who were married, but their wives weren't on the strength, so they'd often be living just outside the barracks.
Same with ships in the old days, in the wooden days.
Women were much more likely to be with their army husbands. It was much harder to follow your navy husband around. Some people did, but it was much harder. But an awful lot of women followed the regiment. And I have just remembered there was an absolutely brilliant book which came out of an incredibly rare thing. It's called Catherine Exley's Diary, or Diaries, and I've got a copy of it, but it's on my desk at work. I'll bring it home and show you next week. But it's a private diary of a woman who was married to a soldier during the Peninsular War. So the bit that we were more preoccupied than you in, it was around about 1812, but we were more preoccupied with what was going on in Spain and Portugal than what was going in America. And she was with her husband's regiment, and this is an account of her literally walking across Europe and back with her children and with her husband and lots of other wives. And it's the only diary of this kind that's known to survive, and it just came to light about 2 or 3 years ago when somebody had it and didn't realise oh, this is, yeah, it's always been in the family. Is it special then? And it's absolutely amazing. It just gives us an incredibly detailed account of what it was like day by day to be a woman just following her husband around. And oh, unbelievable.
I think that I'm seeing this here on Amazon. It was discovered or rediscovered by her great-great-grandson. That is pretty darn cool.
Oh, you found it? Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because yes, Rebecca Probert, who was edited it, she's head of the law department at University of Warwick, of all things. But she's also written a couple of really good books about marriage, which is her specialty. But she arranged a whole day symposium on the basis of this diary, and then the papers are put together and to make the book. But it's absolutely amazing. If you've got an ancestor in the British Army in that period, there's nothing quite like it.
Boy, like a day in the life.
Mm.
All right, I have a question about can you mute yourself for a minute while you're listening? And my question has to do with the term of service, because I've heard a couple of traditions, and I don't know if they are accurate or not. One of them is that, you know, if a man, the oldest son could inherit the land of his father, the younger sons, their choices were to join the military or to become a man of the cloth. But I'm concerned about. I've heard of people being in the military their entire life. What was the normal term of service, would you say? Did that change over time? What's up with that?
It would depend if you're talking about officers or other ranks.
Okay, let's take the lower ranks.
Yeah, the lower ranks, an awful lot of people went into the army because there was nothing else to do. That's why you get so many Scotsmen and Irishmen in the army, because there was no other work. I mean, some of them really wanted to join the army, but you always get more people in the army in areas of high unemployment. And I know you get exactly the same thing in America.
Yes.
Recruit very successfully from the poorest areas because people have fewer choices. So you do get people who serve for a very, very long time. They would normally sign up for a period of something like 12 years was a fairly typical one, and then they might re-enlist. So they wouldn't generally, I don't think anybody ever joined up for life, although it might end up being for life if they got shot the following week. But
yeah,
generally something like 10 years, 12 years. And that document that Hillary had, no, it was a Navy one. It wasn't very easy to read, but it said on his date of joining, and it said hostilities, and that was quite common. If somebody joined up during the war, they would be signing up for the duration of the war. If they joined up in peacetime, it'd be much more likely to say, for 12 years or some fixed period. So a lot of them re-enlisted. Some people did very well out of army life, especially if they rose up through the ranks and became something like a company sergeant major. They could make a very good life. So they would enlist and then they would re-enlist.
Wow, okay, so I'm getting it. We see that here in the U.S. Let's take one more comment from the community, Russ. Our hour is up. Really, Audrey, you've saved our tail here without our Claire, who is well prepared. I spent an hour with her last night.
And she just got her internet back.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Linda says the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders has a book with all the regiments and where they were through the years.
So it's like a compendium of the names of units and their assignments. Interesting. What have you got in front of you there, John, before we sign off?
Well, this is a volume that I bought for £3.50 a long time ago.
And it must have been a long time ago. It looks like an ancient book.
It was printed in 1804.
Whoa.
It's the modern history of England continued from the commencement of hostilities in the year 1803, and it has the most wonderful descriptions of military campaigns and all the weapons and that were taken on a taken a fault somewhere or other, you know.
Well, I do think that as we progress in our study of original documents, that's an incredible old book. Oh my gosh, incredible. I do think that there's two ways we're going to be approaching this, and one of them is what are the records that have survived, whether they're online, on microfilm, or in textual format, and then what can we find about the history of, like, I don't know anything about your Civil War, Audrey, although I do have an Edith Cromwell, who we've never connected to any of the Cromwells. She and her husband, Christopher Gist, were buying property in the Baltimore area, which hadn't been built yet, in 1679. So I imagine, since she was, I imagine she came over as a result of some of those difficulties. But we want to get the historical context and also that social history. I'm glad you mentioned that book on Amazon, so that we can understand what were the, what food did they eat? What was the weather like? What was, what did they have adequate clothing, munitions? What about disease and the treatment of them? Because this time period that we're talking about, the 1800s it wasn't even until World War II the penicillin became readily known to help with disease. And so we're going to learn a lot over these next few sessions. Audrey, thank you for being here today.
Well, the traffic wasn't too bad, so I made it.
Oh, it was a blessing.
7, so just
it was a blessing. Thank you. And Hillary, I appreciate your sharing that document with us. And our gal, was it Kathleen from the community that sent me the email so that we could look at her record with her ancestor being mentioned? That was pretty darn cool. John, thank you for showing us your old book and for kind of helping round out our discussion this morning. So what we're doing, Cousin Russ, thanks for bringing in the comments. What we're doing is we'll meet again next week during this same time period. Audrey, we have a thing we may ask you. And I've asked you things in the past, and we're even on things, believe me. We may find an unusual record that's only in textual format that we may ask you to get a copy of for us, just so we could look at it. I don't have anything to put on my wish list for next week.
Just let me know.
All right, what I'll do is I'll have Claire contact you directly. We'll set up a Facebook private message between you and me and Claire and Russ, and so that it will be easy for her to say, gee, do you have access to this that we know is at the National Archives? And hopefully it isn't out for microfilming or digitization at the time.
We don't do microfilming anymore, no.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask. At the National Archives of the UK, you go straight to digital if you're going to copy them.
Even if we've already got something on microfilm, we used to digitize microfilm, but now we generally go back to the original, even if it had already been microfilm, because digital is so much better. It's in color, for one thing.
Mm-hmm. Color can help us distinguish different things. All right, we're getting.
It's much more practical. So we've got very little microfilm left at all. If you come into our search room, people say, "Where's all the microfilm gone?" Oh, there's a few cabinets just over in that corner there, and half of them are full of fresh air. So
I hear you. Well, Kathleen, thank you for helping us learn a lot today. We're glad that you learned too. It's just priceless to have people who actually live there, and then I'm not just talking through my hat about things. And Cousin Russ, nothing left to say but I'm Dear Myrtle, your friend in genealogy. Happy family tree climbing, everybody. That's a wrap.